I never worked with Ricky Bahir. So, I absolutely refused to do this.
You're listening to the Cosmic Cast. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Cosmic Cast. I'm John Pennyfisher. I'm joined here as usual this week with Thomas Harvey.
You right?
And Ricky Bahir.
Hello.
And this week we've got a very special guest. Once again, we're joined by Manchester alum Nat Curran.
Hi guys, how's it going?
Yeah,
Not too bad. How are you?
All good, all good.
So you're flying in from NASA Goddard and you're only here for a week.
I am, yeah. It's come especially to see the European Lunar Symposium.
That's right. So that should be quite
Exciting.
a chock-packed week for us all with the Lunar Symposium going on. There's loads of people coming down and we're hoping to get, actually, on a side note, loads of people onto the podcast. So you work at NASA Goddard.
I do.
But you started your journey here, didn't you?
I did.
At Manchester University, yeah.
So not only did I get let into Manchester, which is a fantastic and phenomenal place to work.
It was a surprise to all of us.
Yeah, it was a surprise to me as well. And my family and everybody. No, it was, it was really great to work here. And I did my undergraduate and my PhD here.
You did your PhD?
I did.
On lunar samples, right?
I did, yeah.
So
Lunar meteorites and Apollo 16. Yeah.
And so you're working on the moon for your PhD. And do you still work on the moon now?
I do.
Yeah.
Thankfully. Awesome moon. I do. I still look at Apollo 16 samples, actually, a different suite of Apollo 16. So when I was here doing my PhD, I looked at rocks that we call regolith breccias, which are a mixture of different materials collected from the lunar surface. And now I look at impact melts, which are formed during when an impact, like an asteroid or a comet, hits the moon and kind of melts material and forms a new rock called an impact melt.
How long have you been at NASA now?
I've been there 2 years, just over 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah, no, time flies when you're having fun.
And how have you found living in America relative to sunny Manchester?
It's, yeah, exactly, yeah. I miss the sun of Manchester. Yeah, it's brutal. The summers over there are very hot, at least for me. But
so NASA Goddard, I guess, for listeners who are not too familiar where it is, it's just in the DC area, isn't it?
Yeah.
On the Maryland side.
On the Maryland side, yeah, not far from Washington, DC. Yeah. It's a nice commute around the city. You get to see a lot of new things. The roads are massive, which coming back here and driving around here is ridiculous. It's like, how do people drive? But yeah, there are a few differences. The weather, definitely. Yeah. I miss my accent as well. Although I don't think...
But over there you sound really posh, don't you, to them?
Yeah, I do, yeah. They don't... I mean, it sounds like the Queen's English to them, so it's fine. Yeah. But yeah, no. I miss... I was getting on the plane the other day and I was like, oh, Brits. Awesome. Yeah.
You saw someone throwing up on their seat and you're like, oh, British people.
Yeah.
It's great to see them.
Pretty much. Yeah.
How long after your PhD did you actually get your place with NASA then?
I got it before my Viva.
Wow.
So, yeah, I applied for it when I was writing up, which was a terrible thing. Like, I'm trying to write this proposal. And to get so I'm a NASA postdoctoral fellow, and to get with the NASA postdoctoral program, and to get that, you have to write a 15-page proposal of basically the science that you're going to do and conduct while you're in the States. So it's based on like a 2 to 3 year proposal. And I was doing that while I was writing up my thesis, which was an interesting time. As I'm sure you guys know. Are you writing up?
Yeah, I've got just over a month left.
Okay.
Yeah.
So have you just started then?
Yeah. Well, I've just started my research. Yeah. Just started getting data. So
you'll be
see
fine.
What happens. So you must have been absolutely blown away that you got it then. That's a dream job to get.
It's quite a prestigious position to get.
Oh yeah, I was correct. I never in a million years thought I was going to get it at all. I just thought, you got to be in it to win it, so I might as well attempt it and throw something in there. And it's a really good project. I like the proposal, but I wrote it, so it's and it was working with a really good boss as well. So, and I look at noble gases in lunar samples, which is what I did for my undergraduate, and that's kind of what I was doing, but developing in situ techniques for like going to places like the moon or Mars, which was really cool. So yeah, to get it, it blew my mind. Was literally the words. Yeah.
So do you see yourself staying in America long term then, or would you ideally like to come home at some point?
Well, we should just say you've just renewed your contract, haven't you?
Oh, have you?
I have, yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I've renewed it for a third year on as an MPP, but then we also just recently won a new proposal as well.
Wow.
Which was part of the Apollo Next Generation Sample Analysis. So we are very lucky to get our hands on some pristine lunar samples that have never been touched. So that will keep me there for another 2 years after this year.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, it's worth maybe talking a bit more about that because it's quite a cool project. This is led by Chip Shearer, isn't it?
He's one of the teams. Yeah. And then we have our own team. Okay. So there was like 9 teams selected. Chip's got one of the biggest teams.
So I guess there's a whole bunch of different tubes that are being opened, aren't there?
So actually, there are a whole bunch of samples, but they put out 2 drive tubes, so Apollo 17 one and Apollo 16 one, and they're going to open the 17.
Right. So this is one. This has never been opened since it was collected during Apollo. So it's still got this vacuum preserved. So it's quite a significant milestone to be able to open this and re-examine these effectively brand new Apollo samples.
Pretty much, 50 years after the first Apollo mission was, well, first landed Apollo mission was really cool. Yeah.
And I guess you must have all new techniques and things like that now.
Yeah. I mean, this is an important thing. You know, a lot of people ask, why are you still looking at Apollo samples 50 years on? But as analytical techniques improve, there's so much more that we can learn relative to stuff that was done 50 years ago, or even 10, 20 years ago as well, even really.
I mean, you think of what your phone was like 15, 20 years ago, that, and what the Apollo era went up with was like 5 megabytes of data that they could take, so 50 years is a long time for like these analytical techniques to grow and mature. It's exciting. I can't wait to... I mean, they're like a treasure chest that's never been opened, so it's going to be pretty cool.
Yeah, and you'll be doing noble gases.
Noble gases, yeah. So we're going to look at the cosmic ray exposure ages of these samples.
So what do noble gases tell you about cosmic ray exposure, and what is a cosmic ray exposure age?
Yeah, for sure.
I guess, why is it important?
Yeah, so noble gases are a very good tool for telling us some information about how the sample spent its lifetime on the surface of the moon. Okay. So a cosmic ray is a ray that comes from outside of our galaxy. We also get rays, solar cosmic rays that come from the sun and solar wind. And these basically, you can imagine there's very little noble gases to start with on the moon. So these cosmic rays come in, hit target elements in the sample, so things like oxygen and silica, magnesium, and they make noble gases, and they get trapped in the rock. And the way you release those is, you heat the rock up and you release the noble gases and you measure them. So the more time a rock is spent on the surface of the moon, and I'm talking in the top meter or so, the more time it has these cosmic rays basically hitting them, and producing more noble gases. So the noble gases tell us the duration of exposure to the dynamic space environment.
So essentially how long it has been on the surface.
Exactly, yeah. So it can't tell us when in time. Yeah. You need other things you can use noble gases, you can... depending on what type of sample it is, you can use noble gases, to look at the crystallization age of a basalt, or when it lost some of its gases, so when there might have been an impact event. But the cosmic ray exposure age just tells us how long it's been exposed to the space environment, not when it was exposed.
Okay.
But that's very important because some of the other people in this consortium of people that are going to be looking at these pristine samples are looking at volatiles in these samples. And for volatiles, you have various different sources. So cosmic rays can help, well, not help, but they can destroy these volatiles as well. So they need to know the duration or how long it's been exposed to see, what destruction might have occurred to the samples as well.
How much material do you need for one of these analyses?
It's very little. So, it can be anything from milligrams to micrograms.
Mm-hmm.
It basically depends on how much noble gases you expect. So like for argon, it depends on how much potassium there is in there. For these cosmic rays, it depends on also how long they've been exposed as well.
Mm-hmm.
So usually those regolith breccias that I mentioned before, they'll be chock-a-block with noble gases because you get a lot from the solar wind as well. So and 50 years ago, they used a lot more sample mass than what we use today. So that's another thing that, the technique's got a lot better. We can use smaller samples. We can get more information out of smaller samples.
We were talking with John about a paper he had out recently about anorthosites and their material that's been excavated from below the surface and moved to the surface itself. So can you use the cosmic ray exposure ages to work out how long ago they were brought to the surface?
Basically, you get cosmic ray interaction in the top few meters of the moon.
Yeah.
So this cosmic ray exposure age will only give you the duration.
Yeah.
So you need other kind of noble gas isotopes to look at when in time that exposure actually occurred.
Okay.
If it's a regolith breccia, you could use isotopes of argon to see when the solar wind was trapped in the surface of grains.
Yeah.
And you could get an age, a breccia formation age from that.
Well,
or you could use the crystallization age. It's going to be after that time. So the crystallization age, say for a basalt, is when it was actually formed. So when it stopped being a piece of magma and
essentially.
And the same with the anorthosites as well. So they had quite a complex history early on. So when they actually crystallized and formed the surface of the moon, that will be when they cool down, you can figure out their age of those. But you can use argon dating to figure out their ages. Yeah.
Oh, and when you say it doesn't give you, it just gives you the age of how long it's been exposed for. Do you mean in terms of you'll get a number out that says it's been on the surface for 100,000 years or
exactly. Yeah. So it'll give you it's been 800 million years this sample has been exposed to the space weathering, but the surface of the moon is a very complex area. So regolith gets buried and then, exhumed by craters. So this is an accumulative exposure age.
So I guess what you're saying is that rock could have been excavated millions, billions of years ago, but then covered up again.
Exactly.
And then excavated again.
So we call it like a complex history. So they have they can have multiple episodes of
and untangling that is very difficult.
Yeah.
It's one of the nice things about the anorthosites actually is that they generally have really low exposure ages, and some of them have exposure ages under 1 million years. And so that sort of lessens the complexity in a way because you've got less time to move things around within the crust and stuff, which is why they're so good for understanding primary features, I guess.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
So how much of these samples will you actually be getting then? So I know Tom asked you how much do you need to do the actual analyses, but how much will you be provided with?
Yeah, so we're currently working on an Apollo 16 project now. So that's from a drive tube as well. And this...
Just for people who don't know, what is...
Oh, my bad. A drive tube is actually like it's basically a drill core that's drilled 60 to 70 centimeters into the surface of the moon and basically taken a core sample with it. So most of it will be regolith breccias, so or regolith material, which can be anything from fine-grained soil-like material to chips of rock, fragments and stuff like that. So it's took this drive tube that we're working on now is, I think it's about 70 centimeters worth of stuff. And previous work has shown that it's kind of got 5 distinct horizons in it.
Oh, wow.
Now it's not. I'm not saying it's layered, but it's kind of based on chemistry and the maturity, which is basically how long some of these soil particles have spent in the top millimeter. So the mature, so that's based on the solar wind. So particles from the sun that get implanted into the surface of the soil grains. So based on that, we kind of see 5 distinct horizons, and we have samples from each of those 5 as well as the surface sample. So we got a bit of soil, and then you sieve it to try and get the larger fragments out. And for each horizon, we got about 50 to 70 fragments. So I've been looking at all of those fragments to see what they are. seeing what elements are in these samples, see what they're made of. Most of them are what we call impact melts, as I mentioned. So yeah, they're all formed in an impact event. And because they're melted material, you want to kind of find out what precursor material they came from. So whether they're from anorthosites, whether they're from basalts, whether it's a mixture of material. So that's why I'm trying to look at the elements and minerals in there to see. So for the new samples, we estimated maybe there is some sort of horizons in these new samples, and we can get, several samples from different depths. And we can try and understand a bit more about the regolith and how it's turned over and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. So if there are these 5 different horizons, what does that tell you?
So for this current project, because there's 5 different horizons, that means that we might have at least 5 different populations of impact melts.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is look at to see if we can link these impact melts together, and if we measure their ages, that will tell us a lot more about how the regolith, the complexity of the regolith. This burial, exhumation, and all that kind of stuff. We get some more information about how it's been turned over through time, and because these are very little impact melt particles, I'm talking maybe a few millimeters in size, so some of them are a couple of grains of salt. They might tell us about it could be that they only tell us about the more recent history of the moon, or the more recent impacts.
Yes,
yeah. Whereas the bigger chunks of impact melts, like the big rock-sized, melts that they brought back from Apollo, might tell us, because they're bigger fragments, they take, bigger impacts to get rid of, to excavate them. They might tell us about more the earlier stuff that happened on the moon.
Well,
at least that's a hypothesis that we have.
And that's based on the idea that there were larger impacts back then.
Exactly, yeah. Whereas now there's a lot more finer impacts, smaller ones,
Yeah, so for the listeners who don't know, the moon is actually constantly being hit by what we call micrometeorites, which are these tiny little meteorites. And the Earth will be being hit by them as well, but because of our atmosphere, they just burn up.
Tons a year as well.
Yeah, it's quite a significant amount, really.
A lot.
So you applied for the Apollo Next Generation sample analysis, and you managed to get it. So you've got these unopened samples.
Yeah.
And what do you plan to do with them once you get them?
So we don't have them yet.
Yeah.
We hopefully should get them. We have a meeting next week in Houston to try and figure out our next steps. Opening these samples. They've not been open for 50 years. And same with the older samples, so it'd be really cool to try and figure out the best ways of doing this, and this will be great for future sample return missions as well. And once we get them, I'm gonna have a unpacking ceremony, I'm sure. Because noble gas analysis is generally a destructive analysis, because you're trying to get the gas that's trapped within inside the rock. We want to do everything we can before we do that. So first, we're working with a cool group. So there's myself, my boss Barbara Cohen, and then another girl, Sarah Valencia, at Goddard as well. And then we also have Carrie Corrigan from the Smithsonian and Emma Bullock from the Carnegie Institute as well. So we have a really good group.
I didn't ask you everyone you work with.
I've got a list of more people.
Are you filling time?
Yeah, basically. I'm trying to give people shouts out.
It's fine.
I never worked with Ricky Bahir. So, I absolutely refused to do this.
It took a lot to get you on the podcast.
It did, yeah. It's I'm not talking to this guy. That's the whole reason I left Manchester.
So are the samples going to be opened in Houston, or are you going to open them in your lab?
So we hope to go to Houston and pick the samples that we want. Hopefully, if we find these different horizons or different levels in there that we want to.
So at this point, they should be already characterized, and you'll just come in and say, "That's the bit I want."
They should have a bit of characterization, yeah.
So this is after they've been opened, then?
After, or when they get opened,
okay.
So we want to be potentially in Houston when they crack open these samples, and then maybe pick what we want.
Yeah.
If not, we're quite happy to accept whatever NASA gives us. We're not fussy.
The things they've been kept in are in a vacuum, right? So they're keeping the atmosphere out of it.
Yeah.
Why is that important? What does the atmosphere do to them once you've opened it?
It's kind of like a contamination. You want to keep them as pristine as possible. You don't want any external gases going on them or external. Yeah. We have a lot of biology on us.
Yes,
you don't want any of that.
And I guess in terms of the noble gases, it doesn't take much for terrestrial noble gases in our air to contaminate and diffuse through minerals and stuff.
How do you prevent that when you're transporting samples and stuff then?
I mean, you can't. You limit the amount of time that they get exposed to the air, and terrestrial contamination, or like terrestrial air that gets trapped on these surface of these rocks comes off at very low temperatures. So much lower temperatures than what the likes of solar wind comes off, or what we call cosmogenic noble gases that are trapped inside. So they come off at very low temperatures, which is nice.
So for these drive cores, a lot of the seals famously didn't survive re-entry back into Earth. Is it for sure that a lot of the samples that you guys are looking at are definitely the seal is intact and the vacuum has been preserved? Or is it impossible to know that?
I mean, I think that's something that we'll find out soon. It would be great to see if we could measure what the vacuum level is still in the core. I'm not sure if anyone's doing that or if we can do that. Like, it's like, how would you get in there first without cracking it open?
Exactly,
so it's kind of you're in a catch-22. You can't. It'd be nice to check that, but we don't know if you can do that. And from what I heard, there's not much contamination that have occurred on any of the Apollo samples. I've heard a few talks from the curation at NASA, and they're quite adamant that they're all fine. Was it Genesis that survived the desert crash?
Yeah. So Genesis was a mission that flew a number of years ago, and they wanted to measure solar wind by basically flying these big sort of like sticky mats in space and trying to like capture bombardment of stuff in the atmosphere. And when they tried to re-land it, it went splat into the desert, obviously massively contaminating things with sand, presumably, but they were still able to get meaningful measurements out of it.
Success all round.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There's a moral there. That is like,
I'm sure what it is.
Are these tubes coming from the other Apollo safe then?
They are. They're at White Sands.
Yeah.
They're not in Houston.
Okay.
So at least the Apollo 17 sample, the drive core isn't White Sands.
Because I don't know how much we're allowed to sort of say about how Apollo samples are kept necessarily. But
undisclosed sample at undisclosed location.
Yeah. Basically.
Because there are two different, like there's like a safe that's used that has all the sort of day-to-day stuff that people use for all the requests people make annually. And there's like another safe that's just for things that haven't been touched in a very long time.
So is there a lot of material that just hasn't been used at all yet?
There's loads.
I
think
I wouldn't say we've used 50% of the Apollo samples.
It's just it's 40 or 50% hasn't been touched.
I didn't know that. Wow.
So there's a lot of material there.
Do you think that if there was another sample collection mission, then that stuff would be more available or more likely to be made available, or do you think it's more of a sort of scientific posterity?
Good question.
That we don't do the science on it because techniques can only get better and stuff.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think it was a bit of both. I don't think I don't think they're going to wait another 50 years to open the rest of the samples.
Right.
Yeah. You would hope by then that we have had another sample return.
Exactly.
But,
yeah. Oh yeah. I'm like 2024.
There you go. Yeah.
We're going to the moon.
Yeah. So is it quite positive it working in NASA at the moment in terms of like 2024 and we're going back? Is there quite a buzz and like, we're excited, we're going back to space?
I mean, like, it's a great time to work there now. It's like crazy. We're gonna go back and get our next Apollo era. So it's quite exciting to be around and see what's going on.
There must be some pretty exciting people coming to visit and give talks. You must get to interact with some really cool people.
Yeah, there are. I mean, like, just the people that are around me in my group. It's like I never thought I would ever meet any of these guys. Like, it's like, oh, this is really cool. Yeah. And there's a talk later from the head of NASA Science.
Indeed. So, and by the time this is broadcast, hopefully, if all goes to plan, you should all be able to watch the video on our YouTube channel we're going to be recording it. So
Yeah. So that'll be really cool.
Yeah.
So you get to see
Jim Green.
Jim Green, yeah, exactly. So that'll be pretty fun. So yeah, there's a lot of interactions with different people, you know, and then there's a big push now with the commercial sector as well. So yeah, it's exciting to, you know, the moon's getting a bit more light, and it'll be
more
cool.
love and attention.
A bit more love and attention, yeah. I mean, I always give it love and attention, so you know.
But not too much though.
Not too much.
Got to keep those samples pristine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm not gonna lick them or anything.
Okay, so something that we try and ask everybody that comes and has a chat with us is if there was an area of science sort of outside of what you do directly, kind of all the time, doesn't have to be in planetary science at all, that you're particularly interested in, then what would it be?
I like how you guys say science and not just like, if there's any other job, what would you be doing? Outside of inside of science, volcanology or something like that. Yeah, I like volcanoes.
Wasn't you'd like to go because you like going to volcanoes?
Yeah, I was like, I remember
It's
when
really
I started
exciting.
here as an undergraduate, like the guy read my personal statement. I was like, I want to be an astronaut or a volcanologist, and he told me to calm down. So yeah.
And you didn't calm down. You went to work for NASA. Which is good for you.
There we are. Yeah.
Yeah, true. Never calm down.
Yeah,
That's a good life lesson there, isn't it? Never calm down. Is it? I don't know. Probably isn't actually.
I think ours is. Yeah, I think isn't ours never stop exploring. But you know, that cheesy one.
That's pretty cheesy.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, Nat, that's all the time we have because you guys have got to race off to actually start ELS.
Yeah.
And just want to say thank you very much for coming on.
Yes,
You're
it's
more
been a
than
real
welcome.
pleasure and a delight.
Yeah.
And it's
More
good
than
to have
welcome.
you back home again.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
So thank you very much.
You're welcome.